Okay, now we're going to learn how to solve inequalities on a graph. And these are going to be inequalities that have more than one variable. Okay, so inequalities with both x's and y's in them. So to solve this, we're actually going to display the graph of the solution. And there are 4 steps. The first is to get y alone. So typically, to get this y alone, I'd move the x over and then divide by -1. Okay, but you have to remember when you're doing an inequality that if you divide by a negative number, you have to flip the inequality. So instead, I like to always put y on the side that will make it positive, so I don't have to worry about that. So I moved y over, and now I'm going to move the -2 over. This is the inequality I'm trying to graph. It will be based off the equation x minus 2 equals y. Okay. So it's always based off the equation you get when replacing the inequality with an equal to sign. So I'm going to go over here to the graph. Okay. Now, before I can actually graph this equation, I need to decide if the graph line is going to be a solid line, like when we graph an equation, or a dotted line. And the way to tell is if your inequality is just a greater than or a less than, or if it has an equal to bar on the bottom. If it has an equal to bar on the bottom, your graph will be a solid line. But as in this one, we have a just greater than y, and so it's going to be a dotted line. So I'm going to graph this equation, but using a dotted line. So this has a y-intercept of -2 and a slope of 1. Okay, so this is the line y equals x minus 2. And it's dotted. Okay. Now, you have to pick which side to shade, because inequality graphs are always going to have a shaded side. Now, if you go back to this, this says that y is less than the x minus 2. And y is less than means that vertically we should shade down from the equation. So here is the graph. Since I want things less than it, I'm going to shade everything below that graph. And this is the graph of my inequality. Now, we're actually interested in graphing systems of inequalities. Okay, so how is that going to change things? First of all, okay, we're going to graph each inequality using this method, but not yet this shading step. Okay. This, of course, means that you have to decide if they are solid or dotted. Second of all, we're going to apply arrows indicating which direction I would shade if it were just that inequality alone. And third, I'm going to shade the overlap. Okay. All right, so let's do an example of solving a system of inequalities by graphing. So the system I want to solve is x minus y less than 2, x greater than -2, y less than or equal to 3. The first step is to solve for y. Of course, the second one doesn't have a y, so I'm solving for x instead. But this equation, we can solve it for y. Okay, so we get x is less than y plus 2, or x minus 2 is less than y. Okay. Now we're going to go to our graph, okay, and I'm going to draw each of these inequality lines separately. So x minus 2 is less than y. First of all, it's going to be dotted. Okay. And then I'm actually graphing the same one I did on my last example. So this is the line y equals x minus 2. The second is x is greater than or equal to -2. So I'm graphing the inequality, or the equation x equals -2, which is a vertical line at -2, and it will be dotted because there's no or equal to bar on the inequality. And my last one is going to be the equation y equals 3, and it's going to be solid because there was the or equal to bar on that inequality. Now, okay, I'm going to proceed to step 2, which is I'm going to go to each one and indicate which direction I would shade. So for y greater than x minus 2, I need to go to the x minus 2 line, and I would want to shade the greater than side or above it. For x is greater than negative 2, I'm going to go to x equals negative 2, and I want to shade the greater than side, which for a vertical line is to the right. And finally, for y is less than or equal to 3, I go to this line and I want to shade less than side, which is down. Now, the thing I'm going to shade overall must satisfy all 3 of those little arrows. So it must be to the right of this line, below this one, and above this diagonal one. And that overlap is this little triangular region right here. And that is the solution to the system of inequalities.